we have a good 2 hours here, so we can kind of stretch out and really begin a robust and lively conversation around this notion of somatics and embodiment and what it means to be in a human body as we travel on our pilgrimage here. I would first like to start off by saying that my home here is in Sonoma County, and in the moment we're just inundated by huge firestorms. So where I live, I couldn't get internet access, so I'm down with a friend who does have it, but it really is a dire emergency, and so my house now and farm is really filled with additional dogs and additional lambs and additional horses and additional goats and a number of two-leggeds here. So I just wanted to kind of position you there. That's really in the here and now, general here and now. That's my come from. The other thing is that the second thing is I would like to just to do a brief a further introduction of myself, so you really have the influences in my work, who's influenced it, and where I've come from. So let me start off by saying, in many ways, I come from the tradition of the bodily arts. I began the practice of martial arts when I was 12 years old, and basically have been doing martial arts ever since. And I started in mostly the Japanese arts like judo. I was ranked in judo, and then jujitsu, and then karate. I taught hand-to-hand combat in the Marine Corps, and for the last almost 45 years, I've been deeply, deeply wedded to a martial art called Aikido. And much of what I do is influenced by these things. I also went to university on an athletic scholarship, and I ran for the American track and field team in the Central American Games and in the pre-Olympic meet in Mexico City. And really what I learned from this sports and martial arts is really this question of taking action. And what does it mean to take action, and how do you take action? And to what purpose do we take action around? And we might say, what is the most skillful way of taking action? And one of our, part of our mission is to help leaders embody skillful action. So these principles that are in the martial arts influence my work and influence the work at Strozzi Institute, and also not only influence, it's not about martial arts, but it's about the basic principles. I'd like you to know that in 1974, my PhD dissertation was titled The Mind-Body Interface. And my interest really was this question of the mind-body connection, and inquiring into and facing into this way in which our culture separates mind, body, spirit, language, et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of getting a degree in psychology, and for many years, for about 15 years, I was a practicing somatic therapist with a very strong body orientation. And what really came out of that, if I could say it in the most direct and simple way, is that the importance of and the constitutiveness of emotions for human beings. And I say that because I would arguably say that in our culture, in the West, especially America, is that we're kind of in an emotional plague, people being out of touch with their emotions, and that causing mischief around our emotional health, our physical health and also our mental health. And if I would say that the notion of being in the bodily arts had to do with action, that would be our muscular system. And in terms of having a literacy around our emotional life, that would have to do with our organ system, our heart, our guts, you know, all of these organs that are in the deep inside of us, and they're corresponding with each other, and they're doing it in an autonomic way. In other words, to penetrate those organs with our will takes a very focused attention to make that happen. But to be in touch with our emotional self and those organs really allows us to gain fluency around what we feel, how we feel, and what do our emotions tell us about our needs. And then I'd like you to know that I've been in a meditation practice for well over 50 years, and that I have a teacher that I've taken initiation with, and I continue to do meditation in our courses, public courses, in our work with teams and leadership teams. We teach meditation. It's much more digestible now that we have mindfulness. But when I started to bring in meditation, you know, in the late 80s and the early 90s, there was kind of a lot of side-eyeing, like, what do you mean? Why are we just sitting here and focusing our attention? And we could say that our attention has to do with our nervous system. And this possibility of being able to see the attention as actually a muscle or an organ, and that we can cultivate our attention, and we can move our attention outside of ourself in a very focused way. We can move our attention outside of ourself in a widening way. And we can also move our attention within ourselves. And what we know is energy or life follows attention, just as choice follows awareness. And our bodies, or somas, are really the perfect instrument for this. So in this inquiry that we're going to have today, that's some of my background, and I always want to briefly mention that, especially with a group, and we have 12 hours together here, because the reason that I'm in this position speaking really is because of my teachers and what I received from my teachers, and that they've been instrumental both in my personal journey and path, and also being able to build a certain kind of discourse around somatics that can reach a wider and a group of people. So as we're talking here, I hold this as a conversation that we're going to have. So what I'll do is I'll talk some, we'll do some practices, and then I'll say, we'll open it for any questions that we have about anything that I've said or brought up, or how it's either relevant or not relevant to you. So as we move forward here, the first thing I want to do is introduce a practice we call being centered, or centering. And this centering practice, we want to see it as not just a good idea where somebody makes up their mind and going, yes, I'm centered, or yes, I'm present, but you see that they're not. And one of the advantages of working through the body, working with the soma, is that we're able to have a very direct and immediate sense of our own experience. And are we really here? So when I talk about being centered, what I'm saying is that centering brings us into the present moment, being present with other people and being present to the environment. Centering creates a sense of openness in us. We're present and we're open. And we're open to possibilities. We just are not going down one lane or one track and saying, these are how things are, and we have blinders on. We begin to open to possibilities in the world and have a open mind and curiosity and inquiry. And thirdly, we'd say we're present, open, and connected. And what we're connected to is what matters to us. What are our ethics? What's our moral stance, our spiritual stance? What are the values that we hold? What are the values that we embody? So even if we're speaking to somebody who's seemingly on the opposite side of the street than us, and having conversations about life and what life means, and it's totally different, while we can stay open to them and in some way legitimatize, oh, this is what's real for them, we're still grounded in our own values and not grounded, like, again, like I said, not simply like a concept, but really like something very much living and living in our tissues. So as we begin this practice, you can either sit or you can stand, either way. And one of the values of doing it standing is that for most people, we have more access to our hips and our legs and our feet, although it's not necessary. And even if you're not able to stand, you can do this sitting. Or even if you're not able to sit, you can do this lying down. So we're going to organize ourselves on 4 dimensions for the centering practice. And these 4 dimensions are present in all living things, from the single cell to a giraffe, to an elephant, to a human being. And those dimensions are length, this way, width, this way, depth, front and back, and then an organizing principle. This organizing principle manages and directs and intends our attention towards a certain way of being in life. So for example, the organizing principle for human beings is purpose. And we ask ourselves, in this short pilgrimage that we have on this planet, why are you here? What is it that you want to embody? What is it that you want to be? How do you want to be with others? What is the kind of impact or influence that you would like to have? What is your purpose? And we also want to stay open with this, because as we move through time and move through space and have experience build up on us, that experience can shift and can change. So what I'd like you to do, either sitting or standing or lying down if you wish, I'd like you to align yourself along your length. So your head is just above your shoulders. Your shoulders are just above your hips. Your hips are just above your knees. And your knees are just above your ankles, or what's called the malleolus bone, that bone in your ankle. So you're aligned like this. You're not trying to reach up. You're maybe having to confront a certain embarrassment about being straight. But right away, you may have this feeling of, well, length is head, shoulders, hips, knees. And you would say, well, how else does it go? That's how it happens, right? But if you begin to look at people and you begin to feel yourself, there's times with, I'm going to show my profile, that people's heads are forward, or people's heads are down, or the pelvis is tipped back, or there's a rounding of the shoulders, or there's kind of an overinflation of trying to reach up this way. So as you're in your length right now, and really what I'm asking you to do is to bring your attention to the life of your body. So you're just not going, yes, head and shoulders, and I'm there, I'm there. It's actually a felt sensation that you have. A natural felt sensation of being in length. And in length, what we're practicing is both straightening and we're settling. It's often called tenshi, the We're the bridge between heaven and earth. Our feet are solidly on the ground. And we have a moral and a spiritual vision. And while we're straightening in our length, we're also settling. We're straightening and settling. We're straightening and relaxing down. And we're going to practice that while we're in length by bringing your attention to your eyes. And what I want you to do is to relax your eyes. And maybe no one has ever said that to you before. Relax your eyes. So what that means is come behind your eyes. So these muscles around here on the side that go even all the way around like a band here, just let those relax. So you're not blurring your eyes, you can focus straight ahead, but all of a sudden your peripheral vision opens. Let me tell you why this is important. The eyes are connected to the brain by the optic nerve. You know, neurologists will tell us it's not classically a nerve, the optic nerve, but if our eyes are tight or squeezed, or we have that 1,000-yard stare, or we're just in our head thinking and we're really not seeing but have rigid, stiff eyes, that tension gets transferred back to the brain, and then the brain as an organ will just very slightly contract. Not much, but it will just slightly contract. And in that contraction, if that's done over time and that becomes embodied, what will happen is that contraction will precipitate down through the central nervous system. So simply by having tight eyes can make us tight, can make us tense, which will ultimately create fatigue. So in our length, your eyes are relaxed. The system's designed that the teeth never have to touch. So relax your jaw at the hinge and at the chin. And it doesn't mean your mouth is like hanging open necessarily, but it does mean there's space there. So if you ever see yourself grinding your teeth, or you're with a colleague or a friend or an intimate, and you see these muscles tightening here, you could ask yourself, what am I chewing on? Or what are they chewing on? The system's designed that there's always a slight space between the teeth. Now let's do this. Everybody take an in-breath and raise your shoulders up to your ears. Let your breath out and let them drop. And again, take a deep breath in and drop. So the shoulder muscles are resting on the shoulder girdle. And I will say this again when we get into large muscles in the legs and pelvis, is that the system is designed so the mass of the body, and think of the mass as our muscular system, our mass is being held by the skeletal system. Mass is not being held by mass. What does that look like? Some of you can't see me, but some of you can. But if you see me, I'm raising my eyebrows up. So everybody do that for a minute. Raise your eyebrows up. Your eyes are up. That's mass holding up mass. Let your eyebrows drop. Your forehead relax. Now bring your shoulders up 1/2 inch. That's mass holding up mass. Start to breathe high in your upper chest. That's mass holding mass. So again, the system is designed that we allow our muscular system to relax on the skeletal system. And in this way, we're not fighting gravity. So eyes are relaxed, jaws relaxed, shoulders are dropped, and let your breath drop to the abdomen. You can take a few deep breaths there to make sure it really drops down. Just like horses will blow, they'll take a deep breath. And what that means is when I take an in-breath, the abdomen will subtly move outward. When I exhale, it'll slightly come in. And this is really going against a cultural frame. The cultural frame is that person on the cover of Men's Health or Vanity Fair, and it's just an airbrush flat body. So what we're doing is not pushing our abdomen out, but relaxing the abdomen. So the organs have enough room to correspond with each other, to send each other blood, to send each other hormones, enzymes, et cetera, et cetera. Eyes relaxed, jaw relaxed, shoulders dropped, breath is dropped. Now let's come into the pelvic bowl. Pelvic bowl is like the shoulder girdle, like it's like a railway station. There's a lot of muscles and tendons and ligaments and blood vessels and arteries coming in and out. And what I want you to do is to drop your attention into the pelvic bowl, just below the stomach. Pleasure, reproduction, elimination, balance, a lot of things happen here. And just scan down there, and if anything's tight, just release that. We like to teach at the Strozzi Institute with our eyes open. Clearly, often when we do this with our eyes closed, by eliminating the visual ground, maybe we can concentrate better. But ultimately, we want to do this where if I'm in a moment of pressure, that I'm in the world, that I can do it. I don't have the time to say, let me go in the other room and meditate. I'm doing it right now. Let your knees soften. If you're standing, don't lock your knees. Let the knees soften. Keep letting the energetic flow move downwards. And those large muscles like the thighs and the calf muscles, let those relax and let them just rest on the skeleton. So that's in length. This is the line of dignity. This is the human line. We're the only animal that can sustain this posture for a long time. So in many ways, if you're looking for a miracle, this is it, that we can stand up straight and hopefully live the possibilities of that. Now let's go to width, and let's start with our feet. And feel your feet balanced on the floor. Any place here you can't feel, you can kind of wiggle in if you want. Squeeze your toes, release them, get down into your feet. Feel there's a balance between your knees. We're going to work our way up. Then there's a balance between the two hip sockets right here at the hips. We have tendencies to be bilateral. We'll be listening to one side or the other. Just feel yourself balanced here. And then come up to your rib cage. Now let's take a breath in our rib cage, and let's allow the rib cage to expand out. Feel like a clamshell opening. You're opening a book. So we have width here. Come to your shoulders. Balanced in your shoulders, left and right. And then your head. It's not canted one side to the other or dropped. And see, when you're in this width this way, see if you can feel your clothes that are touching on your arms or your torso or your pant or your legs. So in width, length, where we said heaven and earth, this length this way, We say we have this possibility of moving. We're a social being this way. 8 to 12, 13 months, we start to stand, and all of a sudden we have use of hands. We have effect on the environment more willfully. And if you have something living in your room where you are right now, like a plant or an animal, stone, see if you can sense that. See if you can feel that. And see if you can expand your width so you actually include a loved one in your life that may not be in the room with you. So length that we're able to move, width we're able to move out and become social beings, create boundaries. Let some people very close into us. Other people will say, no, it's good for me to have a certain boundary with them. And it also includes our back. Length, width, and now depth. Because so many senses are in front of us, because all of our machines are in front of us, our handheld devices, our keyboards, our phones, et cetera, the tendency is to be forward moving. So I want you to bring your attention, to your back. For instance, can you feel your low back? If you can't feel it or you can't sense it, and if you can't imagine it, that's okay. Just see where you can and can't. Can you feel the backs of your legs? Can you feel the space between your shoulder blades? And we can hold our back as our life experience, our competency, or expertise in areas, those that raised us, whether you have a complaint with them or not, those that raised you, your teachers, the practices that you've been on. In fact, could you imagine or sense like you have a big tail, like a big dinosaur tail, and you can drop back and into yourself, settle back into yourself. And now very slowly bring your attention through the inside of your torso, that very dark space, all those organs in there, and then come to the front. Right in the front, more in the front now are like the heart and lungs, the big pumps. And liver and intestines. So we're always being moved by our history in the past. We experience things only in this moment right now. And we're monitoring for the best possible future that we can have for ourselves, for our loved ones, for the planet. Depth also in somatics is this notion of there is something that wants to come to form in us. We're evolutionary beings, and through the trajectory of our life, if we go on a way or if we go on a path and we engage in practices in communities, we'll see that we are evolving. We're becoming more awake. We're becoming more kind, more respectful, more fierce, if you will, more open. So it's a possibility in depth is to feel what now wants to come to form. We make plans about it, we have thoughts about it, but if we feel deeply into our depth, what now wants to have life that has been held from life? Is that long withheld joy, long withheld pleasure, long withheld anger? What now wants to come and have life? So we're in length, width, and depth. Now I would like you to put, let's all do our right hand, and put your right hand on your belly button, and then let the palm rest just below that. I'm asking you to do this because it's often easier in the beginning to feel the sensation of that part of your body. And that part of your body is your center of gravity. In different cultures, that's called hara, tantien, koth. That's our balance point. That's the physical organizing principle. Now drop your hand away and let your attention rest in your center of gravity. So you have a dropped, open attention. Your body is relaxed. You're not running a lot of thoughts in your head. And if you do this, your breath is dropped. If you do this, and this is the price of admission, you ready? It's clinically impossible to be anxious. If you look in the DSM-4, the psychiatric manual, one of the definitions of anxiety is the breath is high and rapid. There's an overall contraction in the body, and you're in your head, running one of the 80,500 thoughts that you had yesterday. If you center yourself, you've come out of your head, you've dropped your breath, and you're relaxed. So it's a great medicine for anxiety. And as we know, anxiety is one of the most infectious of moods. So wherever you are as a leader, you're leading your life, you're leading the PTA, you're growing a family, or people follow you. You're leading a group of people, you're in an idea or a proposition about the world. What is important is you have a shape, you have a body that isn't fraught with anxiety. Do we get afraid? Do we get fearful? Yes. One way to combat that in that moment is drop your breath, drop your shoulders, come out of your head, and face into that person or situation that has moved us towards fear. And now, having gone through that piece, I want you just to notice what mood that puts you in. I know some of you are doing that and taking notes, but that's all good. But what mood did that put you in? And some people will pick this up on the negative. You'll have clients that can pick this up on the negative. And what that means is that that person unused to being in their body will going, oh, my back hurts. Or this tension in my shoulder is difficult. And that's valuable because it can say where we are. So in the chat box, as you see, we get calming, relaxed, open, settled, receptive. So this is something that one of the wonderful things about practicing being centered is it's non-equipment intensive, that you can do it any place. You don't need any equipment for it. So let's see if maybe through the next 6 weeks that we're working together that we can all begin a centering practice of one kind or another and have it done in a way or so many times during the day that it actually positively affects ourselves. So we're about 40 minutes in here. So let me just stop for a moment. In terms of what I've said so far, or the centering practice, do you have any questions?
If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or I can also unmute you. if you have any comments.
Well, hello, I've got one.
What's your name?
Hi, I'm Ann Nicholson.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, so I come into this this mind-body therapy certificate program from the point of view of having worked somatically with embodied mindfulness and with pure movement. So one of my challenges that led me to this program is I feel like a lot of people can't do movement, like either they're traumatized or they're have so much anxiety. It almost creates more anxiety for them when I bring them into a centering experience or a movement experience. So then I've sort of, through these other courses we've been having prior to yours, I've learned some techniques that are more relational, ways to sort of back it up into the heart or into the head first before going into this stuff. Because I'm like a Kung Fu Qigong ice bath gal, right? But I want to meet real needs, and there's a small amount of people ready to go right into all that. So can you sort of speak to, like, you know, how to ease people into really this somatic way of working? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that well. I think in one way we begin in that question, we begin into the art of this work, which is that you might say to somebody, you know, before every session we do, let's get centered. And once you've introduced it, you might just say centering. And in the beginning, you'd lead them into it. But you'd say, let's get centered. And what that means is bringing your attention to your body. They say, what does that mean? And you say, that means sensation. Sensation is the building block of life. And that would mean, what's your temperature? Is there a shape or is there a movement here? And that's the guiding. And the art of it really is, and this place in which we're observing keenly the person and going, what's too much and what's too little? Am I going too fast for them so that it just floods them too quickly? I mean, it could even be that somebody in that situation say, let's put your hands together. And what does that feel like? What does it feel like, the hands when they're open? So you may be just starting really at the level in which we go, I can actually handle this much life before I contract or before I get so flooded that I'm out. And really the most simple things. And with a lot of people, I've felt that it's useful if you're asking them to do something like, let's put our hands together and feel there, that you're really doing it together. That some part of the you know, the vestibular, the deeper part of ourselves, our spirit, if you will go, oh, they're not just observing me, they're actually with me. And you know, now our technology and neuroscience will talk about mirror neurons. So even they may be triggered on the outside, something is starting to get built in them. Is that useful?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any more? We can take one more around the practice. Okay, the main thing here is that, you know, instead of centering or world peace being a bumper sticker or a magnet that you put on your refrigerator, there's something that you can do. How do you actually bring that into life? And that's what we're doing. And we say one of the starting places is moving it towards the life of the body. So inside of that, especially as embodiment and mindfulness in certain areas is really starting to gain some momentum, and people seeing the use of it. For example, when I started working in organizations and teams and leadership, and I would say, well, let's do a meditation, I could see over their heads, you know, they saw like the Beatles, or they saw somebody with a white beard and a gown. So I said, no, this is what we're doing is attention training. You're training your attention and a The attention is like a muscle or an organ that you can strengthen. So it'll help you focus more. It'll help you refine your focus. It'll help you open it up. You'll see that you're able to direct it. And we know that people that are both fulfilled in their life and successful, they can train their attention. So inside of this conversation, it's very important, I think, to remember two things. That this notion of embodiment and this notion of mindfulness has been with our ancestors forever. This wasn't invented in the first decade of the 21st century. Our hunter-gatherers were very mindful, had a very expanded awareness, and were very present to their environment, to their families and their tribes, and really connected to something deeper, something about the land and the universe much deeper. So in many ways, we can say that what we're doing is that we're awakening something in us that's lying dormant and that has been inside of the evolution of human beings for really a long time. The other thing is that we want to stay attentive to the notion that once we start talking about soma, body, self, is that we can start to collapse that into human exceptionalism. Like the universe is revolving around the human being, that everything is human-centric. And that particular point of view, as it's become more and more refined, more and more actually legislated, and much more into working doctrines and philosophy, has caused a huge amount of damage in the world, to our environment and to other people. So as somatic practitioners, we want to remember that, well, one of the examples I use, I was talking to somebody from the Forest Service the other day, and they were talking about this notion of shepherding or taking care of the forest. And I said, that seems kind of arrogant. The forest has been taking care of itself for 2 billion years. How can we in 150 years think we're going to take care of it? And that's what I mean, that we don't start to build the human wisdom and compassion and the skill that humans are capable of, but it doesn't put us at the center of the universe or the top of the universe. We have brothers and sisters that have 4 legs and that crawl and that fly, and they have deep, deep roots down. So we always want to keep truing ourselves in that particular way. So there's a book by a guy named James Joyce, Irish writer. He was a Nobel Prize writer in literature, James Joyce. And he had a collection of short stories called The Dublineers. And in one of these short stories, there was a character named Mr. Duffy. And he said, Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. And what he began to point out about Mr. Duffy is this was a man, now we're talking just at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and people started to become instrumental means. And here was a person that had no really deep, contactful, intimate, respectful relationships. This was a man who could only really relate much more to numbers and protocols and procedures than a living process. This was a man who didn't have deep contacts with nature or the universe or the outer world. And he was really talking about somebody who is deeply embodied, disembodied. And I like bringing him up in the beginning here because it points to something that in the West happened about, in the 17th century, where a group of priests and scientists thought to take care of certain superstitions, certain violences, certain aggressions that begin to happen in the world, to invent a philosophy that they called ultimately was called rationalism or Cartesianism. And we're kind of the choir here. We're in here going, no, there's something that I need to pay attention about the living body. And what they did is they were trying to take care of something that was misaligned and off balance at that time. Like I said, a lot of violence, a lot of superstition, a lot of church supremacy, et cetera, and say, what about if we began to construct the world like a big machine or a big clock, and we looked at it rationally? And if you pull this lever or push this button, these things will happen. That process moved us into this notion that the body is a machine and the mind is like a computer. And it reduces the self scientifically to smaller and smaller parts of molecules and atoms. And that's our inheritance. And that inheritance really broke that cycle of people being much more connected to the landscape and to nature and to the environment, and then starting to see human beings as instrumental means. Oh, these people are objects to do these kinds of actions. These beautiful forests are going to be a commodity now, and it is our birthright to take those things over. So even though that we're in a group here that is deeply questioning that and hold that that's not my experience at all, sees where it's down, where it takes things in a downward spiral, most of the West is in that conversation, in that life, that still is being taught to our children and our grandchildren, that this is how the best way that you're going to succeed. And it's a way of bifurcating or putting things in these different categories of there's mind, there's body, there's spirit, there's tissue, there's emotions, there's rational thought, et cetera, et cetera. There's humans, there's landscapes. It's a separating process. And so one of the things that we look at here is that we don't see humans as having a mind, a body, and spirit. What we begin to see is that there's a shape that we're in. We're in this form, in this shape. This shape has length, it has depth, it has width. It gets organizing around, what do I care about? What matters? How can I make the best life for myself and my loved ones and for the world? And that particular kind of shape is what we call our soma. And we call that the shape of our livingness. Is the head on top? Yes. Are the feet at the bottom? Yes. Are the eyes in front? Yes. But we're also historical in this shape of livingness. We don't see mind, body, spirits. What we begin to see is history, wounds that have been healed, the wounds that haven't been healed. We see a longing. We see a story for the best possible future that we can have. We see this way of looking forward while being influenced by our history, looking forward to a future that can be even richer and more lively and more robust and more alive than it is for our children. So somatics is an early Greek word that means the living body in its wholeness. And I would offer to you all, it's the shape of our livingness. And that we begin to train ourselves to look at humans and to feel ourselves and to feel others, to go, what is it like to be in that shape? What does it mean to be in that shape? And that we can also look at the words of Albert Mehrabian, who wrote a book many years ago, 40 years ago now, called Silent Messages. And he's done these longitudinal studies. And he asked this question: what is it that makes somebody credible? cultures all over the world, different classes, races, genders. And essentially, over these 40 years, it always has come out essentially the same. Why would we trust somebody to take the next step towards them? We trust people because they'll keep their promises for sure, but what else? And all of these tests, what they show is this. People listen 93% presence, 93% presence, and 7% content. So even in disembodied cultures, we as the human animal are sensing, listening into the presence, our shape of livingness in others. So when we're into working somatically with others in coaching, in therapy, in teaching, what we can introduce them to is that you can produce an identity for yourself with others by the way that you shape yourself. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. That's important. By reshaping ourselves in having a different shape that we live in and allow different things to come to form, and then going, oh, I've had this one shape for the last 30 years. It's no longer useful for me. So can I let that go? Because now I'm moving into a different phase, a different intersection of my life. So Soma, I'm going to, through our 6 sessions together, I'm going to use body and soma linked together. Okay, so when I say body, I'll also mean soma. We use soma, you know, it's kind of triggering for people. I haven't heard that word much. What does it mean? And it gives you an opportunity to go, oh, this is what I mean by it. Because usually if we say body, my experience has been people think of their golf game or their tennis game, or how do I look? How do I look? And is my stomach flat? You know, it's the image of somebody on a magazine, and we inherit and then adopt these social media images, and then that's body. So what I would like to say to you is that I would claim that the body and the self are intimately linked together. The body and the self are intimately linked together. In other words, when we see somebody and we see themselves acting, we see the emotional life they have, the moods they're in, how they move with other people, we're observing this shape of livingness. That goes against this notion that, well, the metaphor would be like, really the body is like a good butler. And the butler helps you get dressed, cleans you up, makes sure you look presentable, gets you to your task, and then fades to the background. So your mind, people think that mind is here, think mind is going to then do the job. Or the body is like a good donkey, and it's going to transport us to these other places. And this has caused tremendous amount of mischief in the world, this separation. But essentially what I want to leave you with now is a fundamental claim and distinction that the body and self are intimately linked together. So you're listening to my tone of voice, you're listening to my rhythm, you're listening to the way I'm holding myself inside of this electronic environment, and you're making assessments about me, about the self that I am. We make assessments in other ways too, but it's important because we say we can cultivate the self. We can work with the self by working through the body. I don't necessarily mean you can do a lot of push-ups. I don't necessarily mean that you lose 25 pounds. I don't necessarily mean that you have good endurance. Those things are great, support all of them. But what I mean is that who you are in this self right now is intimately and closely interlinked with your tissues, with the mucus in your mouth, with how you hold your posture, your relationship to gravity, the kind of heat that you can generate. So again, I'll repeat, a primary distinction I want to make in these 2 hours is the self in the body, the self and the soma are intimately linked together. And again, this is like this is like swimming upstream from what is learned in our educational systems. This is what's swimming upstream from how it's presented. Like, no, you want to learn. I mean, starting in pre-K now, in kindergarten, in first grade, you see a lot of these teachers are saying, the parents are going, how do I get my kid prepared for SATs? Instead of, no, how do we get our kids to learn how to play? How do we learn our kids how to get along with each other? That's not by following procedures and protocols, but by being in the body. So we can say that once we start to inhabit ourselves, like you said earlier, Anne, that many people, this is a very frightening experience, and you really have to take it step by step. For some people, they land in their body and they say, finally, I'm coming home. Finally, I can be here with dignity. Finally, I have a wider optic in which I see different things. For some people, it's a nightmare. It's just a nightmare. The trauma in their life, their historical condition has been so strong, and they've gone into such kind of contractions that any time coming into the body is a terrifying experience, because you're being asked to feel more life. This is where we feel life, is right here. There's a woman inside of our community here who is a nurse, and she does a lot of work with homeless in San Francisco. And one of the things they found out with them is that once they started to give them housing, and good housing, is that it actually increased their trauma. And you're like, what? Would that increase their trauma? Because once all the environmental things that were happening outside that took their attention, they didn't have to feel themselves as deeply, and they could just react or medicate from those kinds of things. They had a house, they could find a moment of quiet and respite, and all of a sudden, that whole trauma, those things in their bodies were present. So they had to rethink that whole thing. And they would say, I got to get back on the street. All that action, all those movements, all the deals that were being made, how do I survive, actually became kind of a barrier to what we would think of as a good place to be. So it's really thinking that through and then going, how would an individual like that, if we give them a domicile or housing, what are the wise steps to take so it's not jumping into the deep end all at once? Okay, let me stop here. Been going on for about an hour. A question or questions?
There was a couple of questions from Matt. It's this question for Richard. He mentioned George Leonard uses Aikido as the centerpiece for his exploration of high levels of achievement in his book Mastery. What have you learned from this martial art that can be applied to embodied leadership?
George Leonard was a very, very close friend of mine. And George Leonard and myself and another partner, we began Tamalpais Aikido together. And he was a really profound social thinker. And he was a person who got his black belt at the age of 50. And it was like, you know, when somebody's trying, if you remember the history of the 4-minute mile, nobody could run the 4-minute mile. And finally, when somebody ran a 4-minute mile, all kinds of people could. So even in my dojo, I'll have people who are in their 60s and have now get their black belts. So Aikido is a martial art. It's an effective martial art, but it's non-competitive. You don't get your rank by competing. You get your rank by going through years of practice, and then you take tests to show your competency, and your teacher grades you, or the administrative group or panel will grade you in doing this. But it's not competitive. And the notion of Aikido is that when there's an attack coming, can you actually receive the attack? Can you actually receive the attack as a gift? That could be somebody's negative assessment to you. It could be a way that they look at you. It could be them yelling at you. It could be even like, for some people, if you say, God, you look terrific today, you look beautiful, people can feel like there's a threat in that, and they'll contract around it. But you begin to learn that this incoming energy, which we might have perceived earlier as pressure or threat, is actually a gift. And can I, from a centered position, join with it, which we call blend. In Japanese, that's called musubi, which means knot, K-N-O-T, but it refers to you tie into your partner. You tie into the aggression. Instead of running, instead of freezing, instead of leaving our bodies, instead of fighting, we actually tie into that. And we use that to redirect the aggression so it neutralizes the aggression, but not the person. So maybe that helps to say the foundations of Aikido. And there's ways in which, if you train in it in a sincere way, it'll move yourself in your body in a very powerful, effective way. I've been doing it almost 45 years. My teacher's still alive, and I still practice, and I still teach, and I'm still learning. And at least from my view, as I tell people, it's the same with meditation too, as I said. So anyway, if you think I'm a jerk now, you should have seen me 40 years ago. So something's changed like that. And Mastery, I'd recommend the book Mastery. It's beautiful. Any other questions? If you can say to me, and I'd love to hear your voice and even see your picture, that would be great. I'll answer the question down here. The Japanese word for that is musubi. It's the transliteration is M-U-S-U-B-I, musubi, musubi. The conversational space would be like not. Okay, let me move on. So as we move along, I want to ask you to live in the interpretation of the body that we have at Strozzi Institute. Like I said previously, we say body, and it's just so common that, you know, what comes to mind is how I'll perform a sport or some action, or how do I look? And those are all modeled after cultural images and ideas of what beauty is, what grace is, what good looking is, et cetera, et cetera. So what I want to say here is that Body is a domain of action. Even if we're doing this or texting, even if we're typing, even if we're on the phone, it's a domain of action. This is where we take action from. I want to make a distinction between action and movement. You can be very still. You can be very quiet and be in action. You can be in a lot of movement and not be in action. So what's the distinction? The distinction is we're in action when we're connected, when we're somatically connected to our set of concerns that are important to us. So that you can be washing the dishes, changing the diapers, driving your car, and organizing yourself so you're holding the highest set of concerns possible. Let me remind you of the stonecutters story here. I'm sure you're familiar with the stonecutters parable. There's 3 stonecutters. They're sitting on a stool, piece of granite in front of them. They have a cold chisel and a mallet, and they're carving on something. And you ask the first person, what are you doing? And she says, I'm carving a piece of granite. You go to the second person, and it looks like it's a same activity to the casual observer. And you ask him, you say, what are you doing? And he says, I'm building a window. You go to the third person, and then in the third person, same activity, and you ask her, what are you doing? And she says, I'm building a cathedral. We're in action, we're moving, we're doing something, we're in an activity. In order to carve this piece of granite, for the sake of building a cathedral. And the cathedral is your declaration or your commitment to the future that you're wanting to build for yourself, for your loved ones, for this planet, in any of those. So that's what I mean by action. The body is a domain of mood and emotions. Most people think mood is mean if I change my mind, my mood will change. And people think of the mind as the brain, which is not. Mood is a bodily phenomena. The way you organize yourself somatically will create the mood. For example, and you can do this with me here. My shoulders are up like this. This will predispose me to fear. Those that can't see, my shoulders are up by my ears here. A friend of mine, Paul Ekman, who's at University of San Francisco, and he his whole interest was how can you tell somebody's lying? And he did studies all around the world. He would take a picture of somebody like this, and he would say to people in London, what's the mood or emotion? They said they're afraid. He would take it to the highlands of New Guinea, and they say, what is it? They go, they're a fear. So something around Darwin had some really basis of intelligence there, you know, the origins of emotions in human beings. If I'm caved in like this, those of you can't see, I've collapsed my shoulders, I've narrowed out my chest. This will predispose me to resignation. You might say to the person, are you resigned? And they go, no, I'm not. But it will predispose you to it. Why is it? You can't transport as much oxygen. You're fighting gravity. You're being pulled down. You might have had something in your life that really felt like a weight that you can't let go of, and it's pulling you down this way. It'll predispose you to that. moods have longer horizons of time. They're like who you're being in the world. Kind of what is your energetic signature? How people know you? What mood do you bring to things? Emotions have shorter horizons of time. They can be very intense, they can be very strong, and they might just kind of come up, have a lifespan, and then move on. And don't take up, as you won't say, you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, that's their beingness. That happened in that extended moment. Are the inside of moods? Absolutely. They connect with each other. So the body is a domain of mood and emotion. So when you begin to train yourself to look at the shape of our livingness, you can see that in people. You can see how they will abort their emotional life. Something will come up and they'll tie it down immediately. You'll see how people will allow themselves to fully express a certain mood, let's say, of joy and gratefulness in the world. And where other people might just have one, it's most important to have a mood of being contained and being serious and to be academic and to speak seriously about things. You can begin to see that with people. So action, moods, and emotions. And we say that the body, the soma, is a domain of learning. The body is a domain of learning. And we say learning is that when you can take an action that you previously couldn't take while you're under pressure. Learning means that you can take an action that you previously couldn't take or didn't embody, even when you're under some kind of pressure or real or perceived threat. So for example, we all keep practicing being centered, being present, open, and connected, and having to organize ourselves in a way in which we can see that we can present to others in the world like, oh, he's here. Oh, she's open to me. She has a stand that she takes while she's legitimatizing who I am. If we practice that enough, that all of a sudden when there's a real or perceived threat, our body will start to get triggered. Fight, flight, freeze, disassociate. Fight, flight, freeze, disassociate. Pick one of those. We all have one of those from our history. Then if we go centering and we think about it, we go, oh, that guy Strozzi, he talked about centering. Let me do that. If it's embodied, we practice it enough, at least 3,000 repetitions, our body can naturally go back to that. So that's learning. Are there things, rational learning has brought us medicine, has brought us engineering, has brought us law, rule of law, good things. And those people that stand out in those domains, they then practice those distinctions. They just don't say them, they practice those distinctions. That means they're taking actions that they couldn't take before. They just don't have the knowledge, they actually have the wisdom and action to make that happen. The body's a domain of coordination. It's through our bodies, our individual bodies, our collective bodies, that we coordinate with other people. Think of this, that our early ancestors, when they were trying to get lunch and dinner, breakfast, and so on, we're going to push all these woolly oxen off the cliff. Dangerous way to get your dinner, huh? Is what they did is they would dance and sing together. So they began to feel themselves in rhythm together. They began to feel themselves in movement together. And then when it came time to do some action, they were well coordinated. We have a lot of technological instruments that help us do that too. And we allow it to come into our soma and be part of us. So we know places in the world, been to places in the world where people will start their activity with a whole set of movements like Tai Chi Chuan, or they'll do pakwao, you know, some kind of boxing, so that they get coordinated and then they go work together. When at Strozzi Institute, when we work with teams, we would suggest start all your meetings, your board meetings, your team meetings, with a centering exercise. Everybody presents himself with a mood check, and then we give them very simple movements that they do together and start to do them in rhythm. In all the reports, really all the reports that come back, to say, after doing that, this has lubricated our conversations. So then when we sit down to talk, it seems like we get more business done, we get it done more easily, and we just haven't made a plan for the next meeting. We actually got something done. The body's a domain of dignity. Chinese say the dignity lies in our bone marrow. I know a lot of you work with people and are with people, and you do that long enough and you notice everybody wants to be seen as having merit or having value. I know that I have friends that I like being around them just because of their mood. They may not have a specific skill that they do that's inordinately useful for me, or that they add in any other way, but just the mood they bring to the conversation, the mood they bring to the team, has tremendous value. That's what I mean by dignity, is part of the domain of the embodied life. And then I would say that the final domain here is a domain of language. I've often thought, you know, we're called Homo sapiens, which means the wise ones. I think that's debatable if you look at our records. But I would say, how about neurons, Homo neurons, which means the teller of stories. We're the thinking being, and we think through language, and we coordinate and act through language. And we say we don't have language, we are language. We don't say we have bodies, we say we are bodies. We are shapes of livingness. So I live on a small working ranch in Northern California. In the rainy season, we used to have a rainy season. We don't have much of a rainy season anymore. It's really not funny. But the horses would get excited with the first storm. And we would have the herd of horses out in the front pasture, and they would be excited, they'd run, and the rain coming down would make this little kind of small gully. And in this extraordinary, coordinated, elegant way, they would, as a group, leap over that gully and race to the other side of the pasture. And at the other side of the pasture, they didn't stop and seemingly go, that was pretty good. I have an idea. Let's go back and try it again. Except you, Ruby, you do this. Stella, you do this. Superman, you do this, and we'll see if we can do it better. Basically, they're going, what's to eat over here? Or what's the pecking order here? Or I'm going to move closer to here, you, and not to them. And I use that example as that, and believe me, I'm not saying animals don't have emotions or animals don't coordinate well together. They're extraordinary there. But we can look back in the past and have a story about that past and say, is there another way we can live that into the future? Or do we really want to embody that story? Really embody that story so we can take that into our future and even amplify it or enlarge it to something larger. So when we speak about body, let's start to think that this notion of we're actors and agents in the world. And what acting is, we can be still and be in action. You know, some of you are familiar with the Persian poet Jalaluddin Rumi, and he had a founder, the whirling dervishes were founded after him, and he had a saying in one of his ghazals, Das Badar Del Bayar. So while your hands are in the work, your heart is with your friend, capital friend, with the universe, with the oneness. It means that while we're in our work, really our intent is, what's the highest picture that we have of our life? So even if I'm with somebody else, I'm wanting to bring that forward. I have a friend who's dying. She's probably in her last couple months, and in our conversations, I said, how do you want to live this? And she used the Sanskrit word metta, love. I want to cultivate love. So whatever she's doing now, eating, slowly moving around, it's reminding her that what I want to do with this portion of my livingness, how I want to live my dying, is through love. So that's what I mean by language. So we have action, we have our moods and emotions, we have our learning, we have coordination, we have dignity, and we have language. So I'm going to stop again and ask you if you have any questions. Is this making sense to you?
There is a question from Therese. She says, what movement practice would you suggest for helping someone become unstuck if stuck in a very deep freeze response?
Well, again, I want to say, I will tell you my answer to that. I'll say at Strozzi, we're not really prescriptive. If this happens, you do this. What about if this happens, you do that? What we practice is really listening deeply to the other, listening deeply to their soma, legitimatizing that, being with that, feeling that in ourself, and saying with questions, let's try this, or what would you think about this, or how would this move with you? So to answer that question, I'd say there's just almost countless forms of movement that can happen, that can help them be unstuck. What I want to know is, what does it mean by being stuck? And what is it that's being unstuck? And what is it that wants to be touched that could then come to life that doesn't have life now? One of the values of working in a martial arts system is you have a partner, so you get immediate feedback. If you're trying to muscle somebody down, you get immediate feedback. If you don't have enough presence, enough energy flowing through you, they'll push you over, you have immediate feedback. But there's a number of forms, like the 5 rhythms, there's other dance forms, there's Soto motion, there's just countless ways to do that. You know, one way to get, you could get a hill that's maybe 50 yards long, and then you either run up or sprint up or walk up that hill 5 times. So you really get your breath going, your galvanic skin, you're sweating, your galvanic skin response gets activated, and you start moving and sweating that way. But the main thing is we listen to, if I feel stuck, the question is, can you point to the central nexus, the genesis of that stuck point? Is it the jaw? Is it your eyes? Is it your throat? Is it your chest? Is it your belly? Is it your pelvis? Your genitals? Is it your toes? Where is it actually stuck in the body? And then begin to bring your attention to that part of the body and listen to it very closely. So you're really asking, what does it need? because that's in your house, that's in your mansion, your castle, and it's living with you, and it's probably calling out for something. And what is it that it's calling out for? And a good somatic coach or a good somatic therapist can lead somebody towards that. Somebody else?
And again, feel free to unmute yourself to ask a question, or I can read your question off for you in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you.
Okay, I have a question. Hi.
What's your name?
Hi, I'm Effie.
Effie?
Yeah, hi, how
Hi.
are you? So I have a question. I'm interested in the idea of using somatics as a way to rewrite narratives that we have in our lives, or that are actually ingrained in our body language. And so I'm just trying to process like everything that you said in terms of like body and soma, and how we use movement, or just, yeah, I'm trying to still wrap my mind all around it. But is there some way that you can maybe start to kind of like shine some light into how to, if that is a possible thing, using our bodies to reconstruct narratives and redesign our lives?
Yeah, thanks, Effie. You know, actually, what you're saying is a cornerstone. It's a key of somatic education, somatic coaching, somatic therapy. Is that what we're really doing? One of the things that happens is we come in, the person could come in, or you, and say, I'm this particular shape, and basically I got this far with it. And I'm doing well with it, but now I see that there's a different longing that I have, or this way of being no longer works for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I want to do is to go, how can I actually bring forward this new shape, this new conversation, this new way of being, this way that I produce different assessments with people so that I become a different agent or actor in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, what we have to begin to look at is, first of all, the really strong acknowledgement of the current shape that that person has come in with. I'll go into this even more deeply when we talk about the arc of somatic transformation. But inside of the arc of somatic transformation, at the very beginning, this is what we want to recognize and bring into our perception, that at the deepest part of ourselves, and what I mean is like it's the part of the vestibular system, like the basement of the nervous system, or your spirit, if you will. This is what humans scan for. Am I safe?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Am I safe? Humans scan for, am I connected? Do I belong? Am I loved?
Mm-hmm.
Humans scan for dignity. Do I have something of value to bring here? Will I be seen as having merit and value and use? That's in all of us. It's complex because there's places in which some people have connections with people, but they've perpetrated against them and they haven't been safe. So safety and connection can have kind of a complex feeling with each other. I get close to somebody that reminds me of when I was close to this person and they were raising me, but they perpetrated against me. They went against me either sexually, physically, or emotionally. And so it's working through those things. So the piece is, you know, Effie, is we go, oh, they want to move through this change and they're in that current shape. And we want to thank that shape.
Mm-hmm.
We want to thank that behavior. We want to thank that way of relating. We want to thank that worldview, because it really brought people to where they are. Now, I say that because it's really common that when we get to that place, we go, God, I'm so tired of this, of myself. Or I just keep ruining things because of this. And so there's kind of actually a negative relationship that we have with that part that brought us to this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So what's important is turning the attention into that and facing it and acknowledging it. Now, that's not that's not simply a cognitive process. That's a somatic process.
Mm-hmm.
Because those stories, as you eloquently said, live in our tissues. They live in our tissues. They're with us, and they get acted out in all kinds of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So what we want to first do is to go, what is in this current shape? What is the relationship with that current shape? And then if that is different, or if that is shifted, what will be different?
Okay.
So I'm just kind of laying out an outline there. Do you have any questions? It's a very relevant question you're asking. Do you have anything that comes off of that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for context, the reason why I'm interested in that, in how somatics plays into that, is because I'm a dance teacher and typically teach very feminine, sensual movement. And I went into it teaching, just thinking like, okay, I'm doing choreography for my students. And I realized the transformations and the stories that were coming out of a lot of my students. And I'm mothers who had lost their children at, months old, women who've been in abusive relationships, and just like realizing the processing that was happening just because we were being sexy or sensual, and we were really, just like looking in the mirror, but doing so in a positive, non-judgmental way, or if we were kind of saying like, no, we're in a supportive environment and we're doing this because it's empowering. So and just realize the power of when you really become embodied, and then adding movement into that, and then changing your mindset, or looking in the mirror and seeing the reflection of something different than what you walked in thinking you were. And so, so I'm really interested in taking my teaching further and using somatics to dig deeper, and not to just use it as, oh, this is a dance class. It's like, no, everybody is walking in with a set of needs and a set of limitations. And how can we really undo some of those stories and some of those traumas that we have in our life through movement?
Yes, thank you. I want to say, first of all, that was a rich description of what can happen when people enter into a somatic reality.
Mm-hmm.
And second of all is that even though you positioned it as like a dance class and dance for women, that you must have developed a tremendous trust with these students for them to really feel free enough in this community to let these things out. And that, so congratulations. And how wonderful people can do that, and then begin to, that what we see is that the power in healing through somatics. And one of often the very first steps is people are taking new actions, or they are beginning to tell stories about their lives that they've never told anybody else before. And what we see unequivocally is the healing aspect of that. So I don't know what else to say, except if you come to Strozzi Institute, I'll help you how to go the next step and help their healing.
I live in Oakland. I've already been checking you guys out.
Oh, you're in Oakland, yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for answering that much and shedding just a lot of this information. It definitely informs just so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Can I say one more thing here, Effie? Just came to mind. Can I offer one more thing? Are you on mute, Effie?
Oh no, I'm not.
So are you good with I offer one more thing here?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I would say, you know, when these stories start to come out and you're listening to them, and you know, I'm picking up from you that you're naturally both astounded by it and curious. Um, what is the next thing that you want to ask them about that story? Now, what I offered in the beginning is to say, oh, where have you kept that in your body? Now, you might have been doing some movement around the shoulder girdle or the pelvis or maybe the hands. And you could ask them to continue to allow that particular part of the soma or body to open up by saying, where does that reside in you? And how does that reside in you?
Yeah, that's really great. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, one of the practices I have done is just, and I mean, it was just intuitive based. They're, you know, just going based off of like what I thought would be helpful, was asking to, and this was only with a trusted student because I didn't want to bring up too many triggers, but using the movement to specifying a specific story that created hurt or pain in this person's life, and then thinking about a different way that that scenario could occur, and then having them move or be inspired to move from that new narrative or from that new story. So I really love the idea of actually, you know, even before going into something like that, even checking like where do you actually feel some of that that pain or trigger or any, you know, anything that's coming up around that in your actual physical body. And
Yeah.
I see it in the hips more than anything. I see it a lot in, you know, the low back, a lot of tension or just a lot of inflexibility or lack of motion in, you know, and I think that makes sense for women, especially too, just in the hips and in the low.
Good.
You.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Yes, we had a couple of questions come through in the chat. There's two questions. Agni's asking, could you please repeat the domains?
Yes.
It's like a quick...
Domain of action, domain of mood / emotions, the domain of coordinating with other people, domain of learning, domain of dignity, and the domain of language. We're the storyteller.
Okay. And the other question from Erica, she asked, would this be a good type of therapy for someone that suffers from dissociative disorder?
With a skilled practitioner, the short answer is yes. The short answer is yes. And like I've said a number of times, it has to do with that the skilled practitioner can then read the client, read the person in the room with you, the coachee, and then take them step by step through it, especially if they start to feel too much too soon. That can be a trigger for disassociation. So there has to be a skill in that. I want to say something too before I forget it here in these last 15 minutes, is that, you know, when I told you in the beginning about my background, you know, that basically I'm the type of person that's been on path. I've chosen these ways, and I've been on path over a long period of time. You know, the path of meditation, and also the path of martial arts, or martial arts, and also the path of I've been trained in a lot of different bodywork forms too. Like I was on the very first classes of structural integration, or Rolfing, if that means anything to you. I was an apprentice to a man named Randolph Stone, Dr. Randolph Stone, who started polarity therapy. And I worked very closely with a number of direct students of Wilhelm Reich that really informed my work. So all of those things have really informed my worldview, my view of human beings. And so that I see somatics are this path of the shape of our livingness as a path, and not like you can take things out of it and kind of paste them on to what you're doing, but it reduces the power of it. So I teach from a point of view of a path or a way. I'm not saying it's the only path or it's even the right path. This is what I do. And so that's why it's kind of less prescriptive, or how do we do this? Because like in our trainings, what we always say is that you have to be embodied yourself. You have to be living what you're teaching in some kind of a way, some kind of authentic, genuine way. And yeah, so I'm putting that out there. Let me move on a little bit, and then we can go back for Q&A if there are, is that there's 3 buckets that we can think of in terms of working with people or working with bodies and somas. One is we work on the body. And this is the situation in which somebody has such a strong symptom that is very difficult for them to go deeper because the symptom has such volume. Migraine headaches, low back pain, constipation, acid reflux. And there's a lot of really rich alternative medicine people, alternative healers, and even in Western medicine that can work on that. We say that's working on the body. Then we say that there's working with the body. And working with the body can be exemplified by this particular example. The person has these headaches that come up, or a neck that just bothers them. The body worker, the somaticist, works with them. It goes away, gives them some tips for practices. A week later, they're back in. This happens over time. Feel better, I'm doing these. And then finally, the practitioner says, when does this start? There's a conversation about it. It may not have an answer immediately, but for the sake of my distinction here, we could say the person goes, you know what? It's every time I have a conversation with Bobby, or every time I'm talking with Harriet at work, then my headache starts. So basically, you're in the social domain then. You're in a social context. And they realize that in ways that I have conversation with certain people, certain situations, certain outlooks in life, then I start to get this symptom. And that can be inside of a social context always, that we're always paying attention to, is class, gender, race, ethnicity. Those things, culture lives in our tissues as well, in a context external to us. So in that situation, the practitioner, if they're fully qualified and they work here, they say, let's go back to that and tell me, enact this conversation that you have with Bob or Harriet, and who are they to you? And what happens inside of your breath pattern? What happens inside of your jaw band, what happens inside of your neck, et cetera, et cetera. So they begin to see that when they're in this particular social condition, again, I reiterate, what's always at play is gender, race, class, ethnicity. When that begins to occur, they go, oh, if you listen to your body, you're going, oh, here I'm tightening down. And I'm tightening down through my occipital ridge. So all that blood is trapped in there and is creating pressure. Therefore, I get a headache. Because I'm protecting myself, because I feel threatened, because I don't feel acknowledged, because I don't feel seen, because I feel systemically prejudiced against. That's working with. So you're really working with the person as they move through the world that way. It can be corrected, but it comes up during that time. Third piece is working through the body. And working through the body is when, excuse me, working through the body is that when we start to become in touch with the core life energy that animates us, that can be called in different cultures ki, chi, prana, elan vital. This energy that moves through us and then animates our gestures, our behaviors, the way we're in relationship with others, our life of moods and emotions, how we develop stories and narratives about who we are and who the world is. How do we make ourselves internally safe, internally loved, and internally dignified? And we're able to build communities in which that can be external also. So it's really getting in touch with this 3 billion years of evolution, 3 billion years of evolution that's moving towards more complexity, more connection, more contact, and it holds a tremendous amount, it embodies a tremendous amount of wisdom, and it embodies a tremendous amount of compassion, and it embodies a tremendous amount of skillful action. That would be working through the body. You can think of those as like those Russian dolls that are inside of each other. They're not really separate compartments. That's the shape of our livingness. And so we can both work on certain kind of symptoms we may have physically, and at the same time be connected to this deep, deep core life energy that really wants to come up and have shape and have form and beingness in the world. And how that actually relates to those particular moments of conflict or pressure or avoidance or connection that we might have with others. And there's people that major in one of those things. They'll major in one of those things. And then there's other people to say, I want to see this as one big picture. But at some point, the symptom might be so much that you go, no, I really don't have the competency. I'll take that someplace else. So in this way, we begin to see the possibility of the body being self-generating, self-healing, and self-educating. And I will say right now, the state doesn't like that. Because we start to become self-generating, self-educating, and self-healing ourselves. And this can happen through a somatic reality. Um, we're coming down the home stretch here. And let's just everybody for a moment settle into your back. I'm doing this with you. So you have a feeling of a back and down. And let's let our breath drop to our belly. Little space between our teeth. And our eyes are relaxed. We're behind our eyes. So we're seeing from behind our eyes. We're not reaching out to make a world. We're letting the world come to us. And let's ask ourselves, what's my mood right now? And be really honest and genuine about that. And we'll say that hungry's not a mood. We'll say that tired's not a mood. But what I'm saying is if we say, no, I feel anxious, we can be anxious, we can be genuine and say, no, I part of being human is we have fear. And I feel anxious. That allows us to go, and do I want to shift that? And how does that live in my body? Oh, my breath is a little bit high. Let me drop my breath. Let me get out of my head about what my anxiety is. And for today, we work with the belly center, the center of gravity, dropping my attention to the center of gravity. Does anybody have any questions or comments you would like to end with?
We just have a couple of comments coming in. I know Therese says that her mic isn't working, so her comment is to acknowledge how incredibly powerful this is. Thank you, Richard. Naya says that she's so excited for this course. Lots of excitement and appreciation for this training and learning from what you've shared, Richard, so far. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for that. Thanks for those reflections. Yeah, I hope this is useful. You know, my idea is that since we have so much time, really, I'm not accustomed to talking for 2 hours straight. But what I do is I'll say, talk. Here's some relevance. Here's a distinction. Now let's practice. Let's practice together. Let's stop. What was that practice like for you? What did you do? What happened? How we build on that, and then we go back again. So I'm glad this is useful and valuable. It is a good time that we can all kind of stretch out here in this 2 hours. And as I said before, continue to have this with me as a conversation and as an inquiry. And don't believe anything I say. Try it on. Try it on, chew it, digest it yourself. And I'd like everybody to, we don't have to make a solid commitment here, but take on a centering practice every day. Even if you stand in one place and do it, I'm assuming a lot of you already have practices that you do. You know, one of the practices I do is I sit every day for about 40-45 minutes. I have a Japanese staff, a Joe, that I do that as a practice. And then I take a walk for about 25 minutes and walk in a centered way. But I think that if we all say, even if I do something every day for 15 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever's digestible to you, then that will enrich our conversations. That will enrich our conversations. So if there's nothing else, let me say that what we say at Strozzi Institute, which is take it easy, but take it.